Hi there, everyone. It is 1 o'clock and it's Wednesday. Welcome to the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, along with Edgar Zazwata, ACSA Senior Director of Policy and Governmental Relations. I'm Naj Ali Khan, ACSA Senior Director of Marketing and Communications. Welcome. Go ahead and jump on our chat today. Say hello. Let us know where you're watching from, what's happening in your school district today. Edgar, good to see you. How are you today?
Good to see you, Naj. Busy week. I feel like we've seen our folks a few times, but always excited when Wednesday 1 o'clock comes around. So good to be here.
Yes, I would agree with you. This is the highlight of my week, being able to talk with our members. Folks, we've got a real busy show for you today. We've got Department of Finance that's going to come on today to talk a little bit about the school reopening plan and the budget. Want to give you guys a couple of updates. We did have that regional stay-at-home order that came out from the governor several weeks ago, where the state was broken up into 5 regions, and anytime ICU capacity dropped below 15%, that region would be put onto the stay-at-home order. Sacramento region, their stay-at-home order expired. It was lifted yesterday as we went above that 15% ICU capacity. So right now, that makes 3 regions, and congratulations if you're one of those 3 regions. Bay Area, San Joaquin Valley, and Southern California still remain in that group. Also want to let you know a couple of other things. There's a webinar tomorrow. Gianna is going to go ahead and put the link in the chat. This is a webinar hosted by CCEE and the State Health and Human Services, and the state lead on that Safe Schools for All plan. That's going to be from 3 to 4 o'clock. Gianna is going to go ahead and put that in there. And obviously, Edgar, there's so much to talk about with that school reopening plan, including a letter that the education and student advocacy organizations are putting together to send to the governor and the legislature. What do we know about that as of right now?
Yeah, so we're partnering ACSA with some of our partners, our statewide partners, CSBA, ACSA, CASBO, Small School Districts Association. Throughout the pandemic, we've tried to really unify some of our advocacy efforts. And as Jessica, our guest who's going to come on, know, our folks around the state have not been shy about giving some of their perspectives on the governor's incentive plan. So we're working on trying to get some unified points. Kind of our goal there is to tell the administration and the legislature, now that they have to take action on this, what are the pieces that we think are helpful? What do we want to see? Kind of our reactions, some of the things that may be challenges as part of the plan, and maybe some potential considerations for pieces that could help meet this ultimate goal of trying to incentivize or get more schools to in-person instruction as the health situation improves here, hopefully this spring and into the summer.
And we want to say hello to Muhammad and Jennifer and Laura, Mark Campbell with us, Priscilla and Dawn. Good to have you guys with us. Sean Bell dropped in something. He says, happy Wednesday and hello from Oro Grande School District in the beautiful high desert of sunny Southern California. And then sorry about the Bears, Naj. Sean, if this was a sports commentary show, I could go ahead and go on for an entire show about the Bears after this past weekend. But thank you so much for that. Hey, we do want to give you one more update. And last week, Edgar, when we came on the air, it was certainly a very pivotal moment that we were discussing as we were bringing all of our viewers video from Washington, D.C. about the insurrection that was happening over on Capitol Hill. Just want to give you guys some updates 1 week later. The House is currently voting on the article of impeachment. The House has been debating that second impeachment of President Trump. They've been doing so all morning. Apparently, the vote is now underway. As of 11 this morning, there were 6 Republican House members that have voiced their support for a second impeachment. This information coming from NBC News. So wanted to go ahead and pass that along to you guys. And Edgar, you gave some really great points last week about what it's like over there on Capitol Hill. But I think the one thing that was important that you said, and I appreciated that you said this, was let's take a breath, because that is so important right now. From your political view, Edgar, How important is it for us to still be taking that breath right now?
Well, I mean, the thing is, it's definitely been a challenging week, and we were in the midst of it, right? When we were on coming on the air last week, and I think just as that day evolved, and we were able to take a step back, it really struck just like what we were actually watching and how historic, maybe historic in not the right way, those events were. And the one thing I took solace in is right away, we're talking to our members, and some of the discussion was already about how are we going to talk to our kids about this? What resources do we need in our schools? And I know that there's been a lot of discussion and a lot of efforts. I know in my daughter's classes about, all right, how do we make sense of this moment in time into the bigger picture? So I do take some solace there that it has provided an opportunity for all of us as parents or for our members as educators to really try to have those conversations with our kids out there.
Yeah. Want to say hello to Lisa and Sam, John Eberly, Gary Reller, our loyal viewer, Tiffany. Boy, I tell you what, Edgar, there are a lot of new names on here today. That makes me happy. Clearly, they were watching our budget broadcast last Friday because we had so many new viewers there. All right, so let's talk. Let's talk about this. Last Friday, we got that $227 billion spending plan. The proposal from the governor included $85 billion for the Prop 98 guarantee. But the governor is asking lawmakers for early action to approve $2 billion to prioritize reopening of schools. That Safe Schools for All plan, which brings in our guest today, Jessica Holmes from the Department of Finance. She leads the education efforts for the K-12 budget. Jessica, so good to have you on the show with us today.
Thank you so much to both of you.
So let's go ahead and let's start with the why. I know this is a question that you guys are probably getting about the timing of the reopening proposal, given the current health situation. Can you speak to the administration's thinking behind this proposal?
So, they always say that a state budget is a reflection of the priorities of the people who make it. And certainly getting students back to in-person instruction is a big priority for this administration. And not just, in the fall, not just later. We know that there are, the evidence continues to mount, that scientific evidence that students who, especially our younger students, are less likely to be transmitters of disease than older students and adults. And so what you're really seeing here is the priority of the administration to make sure that those young students can come back to school safely, because we know that it's really the best place for them to be and the best place for them to learn.
Jessica, thanks for coming on again. I think you're one of our now repeat guests. Special honor on that end. And it looks, just from looking at the channel, it looks like you also have a fan club there. I know Sheldon Smith giving you a shout out. Jessica, for those that may not know, she is kind of the face of the administration when they're presenting their budget to various stakeholders. Also gets put in the hot seat quite a bit, having to represent the budget in front of legislators. So we're lucky to have her on board today. So question about talking about reaction, right? And I know you've heard from a lot of our groups and heard initial reactions to the proposal. One of the pieces that got people's attention right away was the very aggressive timelines, right? That in order to be eligible for some of the grants, you had to submit application here by the beginning of February. And I know that there's some other benchmarks there on when you have to do things. Kind of some of the reaction has been, how is this possible? How are we going to do this given all of the requirements, given the health situation? Kind of just a reaction from the administration's perspective on those timelines. And do you see any of this proposal evolving on that front as we move forward?
Certainly. So, we've gotten quite a range of feedback, not surprisingly. I think, when you look at the timelines, what you're really seeing is our concerns that to the extent, we're pushing out to things like April, May, you're really minimizing the amount of in-person instruction that kids are going to receive in the remainder of the school year. And obviously, this proposal that we're discussing right now pairs with $4.6 billion that we are proposing in the budget for extending learning time. And that's another conversation that we can talk about. But really what you're seeing in terms of the February 1st deadline and the March 1st deadline is this recognition that we're really trying to get the most out of the rest of the school year that we have. And recognizing too that it's a heavy lift. We understand that. That's why we're really focusing on the youngest students and our cohorts that we've specified: students with disabilities, homeless youth, youth in foster care. But this is an area where we are very motivated, very focused, and we have a real sense of urgency.
And folks, we want to remind you to go ahead and drop in your questions and your comments in our chat. We see we have some questions that have come in from Angela and Gary and Osira, and we'll go ahead and we'll try and address some of those. Jessica, let me talk to you just a little bit about confusion, because it seems like there was some confusion about the requirements for the plan and what needed to be negotiated with labor partners, and then maybe some differences from LEAs and that are not necessarily interested in pursuing the grant. Can you help us provide a little bit more clarity on that piece?
Absolutely. So I think one of the biggest areas of confusion that we've heard has really been around, I'm above, my county is above 28 per 100,000, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. So this money is not for me, or this program is not for me. And that's really not true. You are allowed to apply for the grant funding either by February 1st or March 1st, whenever you're prepared to put in that application. And then when you're above 28 over 100,000, you don't open until you go below that threshold. So really, you can still access the funds even if you are above that amount, and recognizing that you don't have to be under 28 before you can apply. And that you will wait until you're under 28 for you to actually provide in-person instruction. So that's, I think, very important. I think the other thing too is that along those same lines, folks have asked us, well, what if I never, not never, but what if I not, before the end of the school year get below 28? And the answer to that question is you can still use those funds to fund in-person instruction in the next school year, all the way up to December 31st, 2021. So there's definitely opportunities for folks to participate, even if they're in high incidence rate counties.
Jessica, you answered actually one of our members' questions, Gary, who was asking that piece there. So I'll skip to another question. Angela gets at this issue, which I know you've already been hearing this feedback. You addressed a little bit of this about that some of the requirements can be cumbersome and not easy to implement. Namely, there's been a lot of attention on the changes in testing capacity, COVID testing cadence, I should say. And the requirements around having to test much more frequently, even in situations where districts may have already been open, and that's going to cause them to shift. So just an opportunity to react, kind of the administration's thinking on this piece of it, the change on the testing requirements, some of the other pieces like the collective bargaining pieces that are also included as part of the broader application process.
So the focus on testing is really because the most important thing to measure when you're dealing, with transmission are transmission rates. When you're looking at, even with vaccinations, the virus can still be transmitted. So that's why this plan is really focused on testing and keeping tabs on what transmission is happening within schools. For those who are really struggling around this idea of testing, I highly recommend partnering, and we can provide contact information, but partnering with the Department of Public Health. We have resources coming out, technical assistance that's going to be provided through our Valencia lab. We've already done a pilot with 80 LEAs on Valencia lab, and we've gotten really positive feedback from administrators at those LEAs around their experiences with bringing on testing as part of their plan. That it was a lot easier than they anticipated, and we know that the more folks who participate in that program, the lower the testing costs will be as well. So we recognize that it can be overwhelming to consider putting out a testing plan, but that there are resources here to help you to make that happen, and it can be easier than you think.
Jessica, we talked about the governor asking lawmakers for early action to approve the funding for the Safe Schools for All plan. And then David Miyashiro asked the question, is there a deadline for the legislature regarding the governor's proposal for these early expenditures? Is there a timeline that you can tell us about?
So the plan requires that applications start to be submitted to county offices of education by February 1st. That really requires that we start seeing legislative action on this in the next couple of weeks. So this is a really short timeline, a really tight timeline. There's not a specific day that's a deadline for it, but if you're going to see action on this, it's going to be in the next couple of weeks.
Jessica, going along this line of questioning of some of the pieces that have come up, and actually Tom asked a question which we haven't heard too much, but there's not been as much attention paid to this, at least in the circles that we've been gathering folks. The guidelines around guaranteeing that every student had access to high-speed internet, and there is some concern about the practicality of actually ensuring that and how the accountability around that. So maybe talk about that in the context of what that requirement is and what the spirit of the expectation would be here for LEAs.
Certainly. So this is not a new concept. Certainly this was discussed and considered as part of SB 820 and SB 98, which were the budget trailer bills from 2020. However, what we've been talking to folks who have barriers around this about are the creation of things like learning hubs, having some facilities open. Most campuses have high-speed internet, having campuses open for students to come during the day and access that internet for their instructional purposes, or partnering with a local community center or a library to ensure that students have access to high-speed internet. So it doesn't have to be, you going to each home and setting up a hotspot, but we do need to be making sure that students, per our state constitution, have access to a free and appropriate public education. And that's really what the spirit and the intent of that requirement is.
Jessica, Kristen Noonan asks a question. I think a lot of people are looking for some clarity on this. She asks if we've already negotiated MOUs with our labor partners and our schools are open in small, stable cohorts along with robust safety protocols in place. Do we need to renegotiate? I know that is a question that we get often about the coordination with labor partners. What can we tell our viewers about that?
So the good news is, we'll have additional health and safety guidance coming out later this week to update what we've already put out. So that should hopefully provide some, clarity around what the differences are going to be between what the state's going to require and what you currently have in place in your MOUs. So I can't speak too much to that, but what I can say is that generally speaking, if you are open now and you're operating under a plan that's working for you, we're not going to tell you to close. That you can continue to work within that plan, and unless you have a surge or an outbreak at your school site and your local health jurisdiction tells you that you need to close. However, in order to participate in the grant program, you do need to be following whatever the health and safety guidance is that does come out later this week, and that you need to be able to provide in-person instruction pursuant to that guidance, which may mean, depending on what your MOU currently looks like, which may mean looking at reopening that with your teachers and your staff.
Jessica, thanks again for our lightning round of questions here. We don't have to use our questions we came in with because our members are just bombarding us with them. So, and you're not missing a step there. So thank you. John Moon asked if there's been thought to moving the instructional model as opposed to the traditional year. This is a concept that we've heard at least be alluded to. Maybe there's an opportunity also to talk about the learning loss money that the administration is proposing, and how is that connected to some of these ideas of potentially changing the traditional school year, and how would this facilitate that?
Yeah, excellent question. And this is something that I know that our state board president, Linda Darling-Hammond, has discussed publicly as well. So we have proposed $4.6 billion in the budget for extended learning time and academic interventions. We recognize that, education was not exactly the same, obviously, in these last, 8-10 months as it has been. And so that kids may have some gaps that they need to address. And so we are proposing these funds to help extend learning time in whatever way makes the most sense for each LEA. For some LEAs, that's going to mean summer school. For some LEAs, that's going to mean adding days to the instructional calendar. For some, that may mean, adding minutes to the instructional day. It really depends on, what your local facilities, staff, all of those factors are. But the money is intended to support expanding learning time in any way that makes sense. And then in addition, to provide those supports and academic interventions that kids are really going to need when they come back.
Jessica, I'm going to pull another question here because they are coming in. Boy, they are rapid fire, Edgar. You are absolutely right. They are coming in. Give me just a moment here. Let me see if I can get to this one. Edgar, did you ask Todd's question?
I don't believe so. Okay,
let me ask Todd's question. Todd, be watching on YouTube. If testing is supposed to be weekly for students and staff? How is the governor addressing the huge costs associated with it? The amount proposed does not cover that cost. Can you, Jessica, just provide some clarity on that? Because the $2 billion to prioritize the reopening of schools, we understand that is part of that is from the Prop 98 guarantee. Can you maybe address Todd's question?
Absolutely. So just a couple things to clarify. One, the testing cadences that will be released with the new guidance will be different depending on what tier you're in. So there's a different testing cadence for yellow tier, red tier, purple tier. And so it's not necessarily weekly testing for all students and staff in each of those tiers. So that's just something to keep in mind. Secondly, for those folks who are participating in the Valencia Lab and the resources that the state has, as I said before, the more participants we have, the lower the cost. And in addition, we're also looking at different ways that we can continue to reduce costs of testing. In terms of the funding and how it's provided and how it can be used. So if you, for an LEA that is going to open and going to apply for the grant, your grant is generated based on your total ADA. So you have a base amount of either $450 or $337.50 per pupil. That amount is the base amount. That amount is adjusted for your grade span adjustment for LCFF for each student who's in K through 3. That's a 10.4% increase on that $450 or $337, and then for every high school student, 2.6%. On top of that, you're going to receive supplemental and concentration grant adjustments. So those numbers can go up significantly once you look at those values. Then you multiply that by your total ADA, your entire ADA, whether they're coming in person or not. And for unifieds, that includes your high school students, your middle school students, your younger students, whether they're coming in or not. Then those funds can only be used for those students and staff who are providing in-person instruction. So the actual amount that you're going to be allocated on a per in-person pupil basis is going to be much higher than that $450 once you take into account the LCFF adjustments and the fact that every student is generating it, even though not every student is using it. The last thing I want to bring up that I know is a question, folks have been asking us whether or not they need to be testing students and staff that are not in person, and the answer is no. The only families that you need to be offering this to are the families of the students who are coming in person and the staff who are providing in-person instruction. And one last thing, they can opt out. This is not a must-have. So that's going to reduce your pool and your size of testing pretty significantly.
Jessica dropping a lot of knowledge there with that answer. So I'll go in a little bit of a different direction. We're getting a few questions on this issue of the timelines, the COVID safety plan, and a few of our members referenced the January 25th. And Jessica has alluded a couple of times to the fact that there's CDPH guidelines coming out. And maybe you could give a little clarity there that we're anticipating some guidelines under CDPH for all schools, and that how that may differentiate for those LEAs that are going to seek this waiver, this incentive grant to access some of the funding that you're talking about.
Certainly. So yes, we will be releasing, Department of Public Health will be releasing new health and safety guidelines later this week. Those will be important because those will need to be incorporated into the COVID school safety plan if you plan on applying for the funds for the grant. In terms of what's going to be required of schools who don't apply for the grant, because there will be some requirements there. You don't have to provide, if you're not planning on being in person, you don't have to complete the COVID school safety plan. That's only for in-person instruction. So that's really important. If you are in purple tier or higher, you do need to, and you are planning on opening for in-person instruction, whether you're applying for the grant or not, you do need to complete that COVID school safety plan and submit it to your local health jurisdiction. The difference moving forward on the waiver versus COVID school safety plan is that you will no longer have to wait for your local health jurisdiction to approve your plan. They will have a set amount of time over which to review your plan, and to the extent you don't receive any feedback from them telling you not to open after that time period elapses, you can open. So that's another nuance that's different. The last piece around things that folks will have to do regardless of whether or not they're applying for the in-person instruction grant is there are new reporting requirements through the Department of Public Health, and those reporting requirements are for those who are in person. If you have a positive COVID case, you need to be reporting that. And the second piece is You need to be reporting to the Department of Public Health how many students you're serving in a hybrid, in-person, or distance learning model on a regular basis. So those are the new reporting requirements that will apply to everyone, including private schools.
Real quick, Naj, before you go to that question,
Yeah.
I just want to draw a connection to something you brought up at the beginning of the show. This CCEE webinar that we posted, we anticipate, even though there hasn't been a formal announcement, we anticipate that some of the questions that they will be answering is about this very issue, the CDPH guidelines, and having a few other representatives from the administration. So just to put those in their proper bucket, we encourage folks to tune in tomorrow to that webinar. Obviously, we're going to have, this will be a large part of our content in the weeks to come, trying to explain those CDPH guidelines and what that means for our members.
Jessica, let me ask you about the timeline here. Given the goal that reopening schools is the primary goal right now, and the fact that this proposal requires legislative approval, let us know what the timeline is and what are the expectations. Can our viewers and our members expect through this process?
Yeah. So you will see, like I said, new health and safety guidance released by the end of this week. That is the first thing that you will see. And then in the next 2 weeks, as I mentioned before, you will see interactions with the legislature. So that may be in the form of hearings or other types of stakeholder input sessions. And then the legislature will need to take action on that, like I said, in the next couple of weeks. So we will continue to be working with our legislative partners to ensure that, to the extent there are stakeholder input opportunities, that everyone is aware of those and can participate. Until that happens, my office has been taking in quite a bit of feedback, as well as I know the State Board of Education's office, and I am always reachable with questions, comments, concerns, suggestions on my email address, which I don't know if you'll provide, but I can certainly provide it for folks to respond to.
Yeah, Gianna could track that down and she'll put that in.
Wonderful.
Be careful what you ask for there, Jessica. You give out your email, you're going to get some notes there, but we know you're good for it. One more question for me, and I think, feel free if you want to pass on this. There is a question about schools that reopened but then closed due to transmission, and if they're reopening, do they now require a safety plan? I know this is going to be part of some of that guidance or whatnot, but if you want to touch on that.
So yes, the trailer bill that we're proposing currently says that to the extent that you are not open for in-person instruction by the time the new guidance comes out, that you will be subject to that new guidance. So that new guidance, you can continue to operate under the waiver that you are currently under if you are open for in-person instruction now. However, if you are closed during the release of the guidance, that you will need to reopen pursuant to that new guidance.
Hey, Jessica, let me just ask you, as we are getting ready to go and hit the bottom of the hour here. I know that meetings among communicators can be like every other word. We're sitting there and focusing on that. Department of Finance, when you guys are coming up on information like this, what's the debate like in behind the scenes in some of those meetings? What is that experience like as you guys move towards the budget proposal and all that? Is it relaxed? Is it craziness? What can you tell us?
Well, I think it depends on how long we've been talking about the same thing over and over again. After a while, I'm sure we just like you, things can get a little silly. But I think in terms of developing this proposal in particular, we've been agonizing over the details of this for weeks and months, and trying to ensure that we're reacting to the most recent information that's available. And so, we've been talking to a lot of people. We've been trying to do lots of outreach and figure out what's happening in real time. And, it's been interesting. Government is not set up necessarily to move very quickly and to be fluid with the situation. And that's exactly what we've been trying to do. So it's been an interesting experiment, a lot of late nights, a lot of fights, but friendly disagreements. But I think ultimately we're all really just trying to do the best that we can for the kids and the communities in the state, and make it through this pandemic as well as we possibly can.
All right, Jessica Holmes, Department of Finance, the leader on education efforts with K-12's budget. Jessica, thanks so much for being with us. We appreciate all of your help, and I know our viewers appreciated it too. Thanks so much.
Thank you all very much.
Edgar, a couple of things. My crack news team behind the scenes here just has handed me some information that this is just from Capitol Hill, the final vote on here. I'm looking at NBC News right now. It says the House has reached enough votes now to impeach President Trump. That would be the first president of the United States to be impeached twice. So we are just getting that information that has just come through here. Let me ask you, just from a political perspective, Edgar, because you have so much experience with this, when an impeachment takes place, when the House votes to impeach, what is that next step in the process? Is it just like an automatic thing that it goes to the Senate, like they just walk it over? I mean, what is the process for that?
Yeah, you're challenging, and I'm sure some of our civics teachers here, history, could probably give the legislative timeline even better than me. But yeah, I mean, this hasn't happened, and I actually forget the number of times now. I know we've talked about it a lot this year, but so impeachment has only happened a few times. But as it stands, the House votes on impeachment, sent those articles of impeachment to the Senate, as we saw earlier this year, which might seem like an eternity now because that was pre-pandemic. The Senate has to hold a trial on those articles of impeachment. Has been the headlines here over the last couple of days. There's some debate on how it's going to work this time. I think there's some constitutional questions about whether the Senate can actually still take that to trial, have a trial, impeachment trial in the Senate, even if Donald Trump is no longer the president, if this goes past next week. So I think this is obviously only the first step in this process, and it'll be interesting to see what happens now, especially given some of the news that this was bipartisan. If you could call, I mean, it was an overwhelming amount of Republican votes, but there was some Republican support, and I think we would anticipate some Republican support in the Senate as well.
Yeah, from the information right in front of me, it looks like at least 10 House Republicans voted to impeach. So that's that information. Hey, folks, before people leave, we have two more things for you. First, as we move from that subject to the next, let me give you just a little moment of levity here, because I always think the opportunity to joke and have a good time on this show, always important. Scott Smith, who is the great communications leader over at ABC Unified, he and I were having an email exchange last week, and he's a loyal viewer of our show. Scott, I hope you're still watching. So in the midst of our email correspondence, because he was helping me on an EdCal story, he said, we need to have some ACSA Legislative Lunch Break swag. So Scott, from your mouth to our ears, here you go. Prototypes for our legislative lunch break gear: mugs, t-shirts, tchotchkes. Our keeper of the brand, Stephen Long, came up with this. Now, here's what I think is missing. Caricatures are missing on these shirts and these coffee mugs. And I'm not necessarily saying that it has to be you and me with caricatures on it. I'm suggesting that we either have our member leaders on there, and it might be difficult to shoehorn 20 plus caricatures onto one garment, but perhaps maybe our loyal viewers who are here live with us every week, maybe they get their own caricature on there.
I'm a little scared when we start talking about the caricatures. You know, like every time we throw up a picture online, it's a big surprise. But this is awesome. I want to know. There's got to be a perk to doing this every week. When do I get my shirt?
Seriously, seriously. And I feel like if you come up with the idea, perhaps maybe you should be first in line. So Scott, again, from your mouth to our ears here, the second you said it, I got the team going on it. Our keeper of the brand put that together. So there you go. One of these days, Edgar, we'll either have those produced. And when I talk about caricatures, I'm talking specifically about like Family Guy characters or Simpsons characters on those shirts. I think they would work out well. Yeah. Hey, one other thing for you folks. We've got our negotiators Symposium coming up next week. The week after that, we have our Superintendent Symposium. All of these conferences are virtual, don't forget. But we want to give you a little bit of a preview of the ACSA Superintendent Symposium. Registration is open right now, so take a look. Yes, go ahead and register for that, ACSA.org/professional-learning. I love that John Eberly wants bobbleheads. Gary Reller, the great principal over at Matthew Gage Middle School in Riverside Unified, he says he wants in. Victor Cisneros says Bitmojis on it. Sean Bell, he wants face masks on it. I think it'd be great, Edgar, just to have your face on a face mask, right?
I'm scared. Please no.
All right, Edgar. Good seeing you today. Great show. Lots of good information.
Wednesdays at 1 o'clock is apparently the time when news breaks. President's impeached. Apparently, there's a big NBA trade in the works.
What do you got?
A lot of James Harden to the Nets, apparently. So apparently, that's when stuff happens. So.
Hey, you know what? We've always wanted breaking news to happen at 1 o'clock on Wednesdays, and then we say it out loud, and then we have a whole lot of it. It could be worse. It could always happen at like 1:30 on a Wednesday instead of 1 o'clock.
Right. Right.
All right, folks. Thanks so much for being with us today on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. We're back here on Wednesdays, 1 o'clock. Have a great rest of the day, great rest of the week. We'll see you next time.